Welcome to lecture number 27. Lecture number 26 में we started with the concept of budgeting. Then we also talked about a static budget. Static budget में हमने देखा था कि uh, one big shortcoming of static budget is that it only takes one level of activity. So when you make a budget at a specified level of activity, और जो आपकी actual level of activity है, it is different from what you had budgeted, so then it becomes impossible to compare. So in order to overcome this drawback, what companies do is they make flexible budget. Now in a nutshell, what is a flexible budget? Flexible budget is a budget जो आपकी जो एक्चुअल लेवल ऑफ एक्टिविटी है उसके हिसाब से आपके budgeted level of activity को define करता है. So how you do it? When you're making your budget, you try to make your budget based on a range of different values जो आप expect कर रहे होते हैं कि आपकी output या performance होगी. And once you have covered that range, then it is very easy to compare your actual performance with what you have mentioned in the budget. So how do we make the flexible budget? As you know, we have done what a master budget is. A master budget is a complete budget. उसमें you have all your operating budgets और आपके finance related तमाम budgets भी they become a part of the master budget. So तो आपका जो flexible budget है, it uses the master budget as its basis. For example, if you remember when we were doing the sales budget, so हमने ये कहा था कि for the first quarter of next year we will have X volume of sales. Now that was a sales budget keeping in mind the static values. So in a flexible budget, what you say कि, okay, we will have sales for the next quarter in a defined range. So instead of giving a specific level, you give a range, and then based on that range, you make your budget. So how do we develop the flexible budget? To develop the flexible budget, management uses the following steps. It identifies the activity index and the relevant range of activity. As I've just mentioned, for example, आप कहेंगे कि आपका जो production है, it will be between 10,000 to 15,000 units. Now that is a relevant range of activity. Then you identify the variable cost, determine the budgeted variable cost per unit of activity for each cost. As you know, आपकी जो with respect to activity, आपकी cost दो type की है. One is your variable cost and then your fixed cost. So जो आपकी variable cost है, it varies as according to the number of units that you produce. So obviously, whenever we are talking about the variable cost, so we have to calculate the variable cost per unit, as you will see later on. Then we identify the fixed cost and determine the budgeted amount for each cost. You know, fixed cost remains the same whether you produce 1 unit or you produce 1000 units. There is no change in the fixed cost. So you pinpoint the budgeted fixed cost for that period and you identify it. Then you prepare the budget for selected increments of activity within the relevant range. For example, आप कह रहे हैं कि 10,000 units when you produce, so you will have this much cost. If you produce 11,000 units, so आपकी ये cost आएगी, and if you produce let's say 14,000 units, तो आपकी cost ही आएगी. So what it is? It is the selected increments of activity within the relevant range. The activity index chosen should significantly influence the costs being budgeted. For manufacturing overhead costs, for example, the activity index is usually the same as index used in developing the predetermined overhead rate. That is the direct labor hour. This we did in the, when we were doing the predetermined overhead rate, even when we were doing the budgeting, तो आपने note किया होगा कि we were using a predetermined overhead rate. The choice of increment of activity is largely a matter of judgment. For example, if the relevant range is 8,000 to 12,000 direct labor hours, increment of 1,000 hours may be selected. It varies from company to company. According to, when you look at the historical data of your company, and when you try to forecast कि आपकी क्या output या क्या activity level होगा, उसके हिसाब से you can find out the increment levels. Now we will look at a small flexible budget case study. To illustrate the flexible budget, we use Fox Company. Fox's management uses a flexible budget for monthly comparisons of actual and budgeted manufacturing overhead cost of the finishing department. The master budget for the year ending shows expected annual operating capacity of 120,000 direct labor hours and the following overhead rates. Now, what does this 120,000 direct labor hours mean? It means कि आपका ये जो master budget data था, it was based on this level of activity. जो आपकी variable cost थी indirect material 180,000 के, this indirect material cost was based on the operating capacity of 120,000 direct labor hours. And इसके साथ साथ they have also given you the fixed cost. As I've told you, fixed cost remains the same. The four steps for developing the flexible budget are applied as follows. Step one, may you identify the activity index and the relevant range of activity. The activity index is direct labor hours. The relevant range is 8,000 to 12,000 direct labor hours per month. आप कहते हैं कि जो आपकी relevant range है वो 8,000 से 12,000 direct labor hours per month है. आप देखेंगे initially we said it was 120,000 direct labor hours annually. So if for 12 months you have 120,000 direct labor hours, so obviously it is very simple. You can calculate the monthly simply by dividing 120,000 divided by 12. और ये इन्होंने साथ in order to give you a range उन्होंने कहा कि the relevant range is 8,000 to 12,000 direct labor hours per month. If you want to calculate it annually, you simply multiply each by 12. Step 2. Identify the variable cost and determine the budgeted variable cost per unit of activity for each cost. There are three variable costs जैसे आपने इसमें देखा होगा. One is your indirect material, then you have indirect labor, and then you have utilities. So indirect material, if you want to calculate the variable cost per direct labor hour, you know the total number of direct labor hours is 120,000. So you divide each by 120,000 to get the variable cost per unit. So the indirect material is $1.5, indirect labor is 2, and utilities is $0.5 per direct labor hour. So the variable cost per unit comes to $4. Step 3, identify the fixed cost and determine the budgeted amount for each cost. There are three fixed costs. Since Fox decides monthly budget data, it divides each annual budgeted cost by 12 to find the monthly income. They have already given you the fixed cost. You divide each fixed cost by 12 to simply calculate the depreciation per month, supervision per month, and property taxes per month. और वो आपके आ जाएंगे 15,000, 10,000 and 5,000. Prepare the budget for selected increments of activity within the relevant range. Now, हमने कहा था कि you have to, when you are trying to figure out the increment in the activity level, so you simply look at the activity of your company and try to judge okay, what is the best incremental way that you want to adopt. तो आप इसमें कहते हैं कि it should be 1,000 direct labor hours per month. So you start by 8,000. 8,000 means कि you expect कि आपकी जो activity level है that will be 8,000 direct labor hours per month. आप उसमें increment means कि आप कहते हैं okay if it comes to 9,000 then what will be the monthly manufacturing overhead rate. 10,000 पे कितना 11,000 12,000. So it simply is an increment of $1,000 ताकि आपको this way you get different levels of activity. And what you're doing, you're making the monthly manufacturing overhead flexible budget. We already know the variable cost per unit. So in order to find the indirect material, we calculated it here, which is $1.5. तो you multiply 1.5 by 8,000. इसी तरह you multiply indirect labor जो आपकी आई थी $2 थी by the estimated activity level. इसी तरह again then you find the utilities, and this way you find the total variable cost at the activity level of 8,000. Uske baad, we know the fixed cost remains the same no matter what the activity is. So you do it is 30,000, whatever the activity rate is. So the variable cost at 8,000 level of activity is 32,000, and the fixed cost is 30,000. The total cost will be 62,000. So that is how you calculate the total cost at each level of activity. Fox uses the formula below to determine the total budgeted cost at any level of activity. We know fixed cost remains the same, and it is 30,000, and variable cost per unit, we know it is $4. So the total variable cost per unit of activity into activity level, whatever activity level you desire, you simply multiply it with the total variable cost per unit of activity and add fixed cost to it. So you will get the total budgeted cost at that level of activity. जैसे आपका इधर 8,000, 9,000, 10,000 सारों पे निकला है. Even if you use this formula, you can simply calculate this total cost figure. For fixed costs, for Fox, fixed costs are 30,000 and total variable cost per direct labor hour is 4. At 9,000 direct labor hours, total budgeted cost are 66,000. How? It is 30,000 is the fixed cost and 4 is the per unit variable cost, 9,000 is the activity. So you simply use this formula to calculate the total cost. If you can do it for, at 8,622 direct labor hours activity level, you simply put it into the data and you get the total cost. So now this way we can also make a graph. And now this is a graph. It shows the direct labor hours on this axis, which is in thousands. So up 2,000 जो है, it is 2,000 direct labor hours of activity. Then you have cost here. अच्छा, cost में आप note करेंगे जो आपकी budgeted fixed cost है, it remains the same. It is 30,000 no matter whether the production is 0 or the production is 14,000. So the budgeted fixed cost remains the same. उसके बाद आपकी budgeted variable cost हो गई, वो obviously it will start from 30,000. उसकी वजह ये है कि 30 जो आपका 30,000 है, that is the fixed cost. So total cost will obviously come above it, no matter what the level of activity it, and at the activity level of 0, your total cost will be equal to your total fixed cost. सो आप देखते हैं कि जो आपका 10,000 की लेवल ऑफ एक्टिविटी है, उस पे यू गेट समथिंग बिलो 70,000. आपका जो 12,000 पे है, उस पे यू गेट अ फिगर बिलो 18,000. सो यू कैन आल्सो यूज ग्राफ टू कैलकुलेट योर टोटल कॉस्ट and at different levels of activity. Once you have made the flexible budget, then you also try to incorporate it into a flexible budget report. As we have already discussed, budget reports are very important. This way you can judge the performance of the management. You can evaluate how the management is doing, what sort of mistakes they are making, what are their strong points. Flexible budget reports are another type of internal report. The flexible budget report consists of two sections: production data for a selected activity index such as direct labor hours, and cost data for variable and fixed costs. The report provides a basis for evaluating the manager's performance in two areas: production control and cost control. So what you simply do, आप कहते हैं कि your budget at 9,000 direct labor hours, what was the budgeted cost? We already know how to calculate it. You know the indirect material per direct labor hour, indirect labor we know, utilities we know, which we calculated above. You simply calculate it, multiply it with the desired level, and you get the total variable cost at 9,000. We know the fixed cost, so we get the total. When you compare it with the actual, so obviously you can try to calculate the result. It will be either favorable, unfavorable, or break even. How appropriate is this report in evaluating the finishing department's managers' performance in controlling overhead rate cost? The report clearly provides a reliable basis. Both actual and budget costs are based on the activity level work during January. So we say कि January में the activity level was 9,000. What we are doing? We are comparing it with the budgeted level of 9,000. So the budgeting methodology is realistic and it is correct. Both actual and budget costs are based on the activity level work during January. Since variable costs generally are incurred directly by the department, the difference between the budget allowance for those hours and the actual cost is the responsibility of the department manager. So whatever result we get, whether it is unfavorable or favorable, that can be directly linked to the performance of the manager of that department, because that manager is responsible for this activity. In subsequent months, Fox Company will prepare other flexible budget reports for each month. The budget data are based on the actual activity level attained. In February, that level may be 11,000 direct labor hours. In July, 10,000, and so on. So this is the main advantage of the flexible budget. Whatever level of activity you actually attain, you can compare it with the budgeted one to clearly figure out the actual performance of that department and that manager. Note that this flexible budget is both based on a single cost driver. A more accurate budget often can be developed using the activity-based costing concepts. If you remember, we did ABC before. So this is the end of lecture number 27. Lecture number 28 may we will do responsibility accounting.